Legislative changes would provide the legal foundation for this transformation. New laws could redefine citizenship eligibility, potentially reinterpreting constitutional protections to exclude descendants of certain groups or specific ethnic communities. A modernized citizenship framework, prioritizing European heritage, would be enacted to formalize exclusionary policies. To withstand legal challenges from advocacy groups, judges aligned with the agenda would be appointed to uphold these reforms. This legislative overhaul would be passed by 2028, with citizenship revisions beginning in 2030 for African Americans, the faith-based community, and non-European residents, while cultural dissenters and migration enablers would face denaturalization by 2035, limited to 1% of the most severe cases to maintain focus and public support. Population management. Controlling demographic trends is a critical component of the plan. Financial incentives, such as tax credits and family subsidies, would encourage European-descended families to increase their birth rates, while penalties, such as reduced access to public services or higher taxes, would be imposed on targeted groups to discourage reproduction. In select cases, voluntary programs framed as public health initiatives could be offered to further reduce birth rates among non-European groups. These fertility programs would launch in 2026, with incentives for European-descended families escalating by 2030 and penalties for targeted groups intensifying by 2035. The goal is to reduce non-European birth rates by 50% by 2040, with European-descended births comprising 80% of total births by 2050, supported by a projected 2% annual increase in European heritage fertility rates. Relocation incentives. Financial support for voluntary relocation would play a pivotal role in encouraging targeted groups to leave the United States. The faith-based community and African Americans would be offered basic travel assistance, such as bus or airfare, and short-term housing aid, such as motel stays for up to 30 days, to facilitate relocation to their respective destinations, a Middle Eastern homeland for the former and African nations for the latter. Undocumented migrants would receive similar minimal travel support for return to regions like Latin America. These benefits would decrease over time to encourage prompt compliance. In 2026, individuals could receive full travel cost coverage and short-term housing assistance, but by 2040, this would be reduced to partial travel support with no housing aid, and no support would be offered after 2045. International partnerships with foreign governments and organizations would streamline resettlement, establishing reception centers in target regions. For the faith-based community, coordination with their homeland would facilitate immigration, while negotiations with African nations would ensure acceptance of returnees. Relocation programs would begin in 2026, aiming to relocate 50% of the faith-based community and African Americans by 2035 and 90% by 2050, with undocumented migrants targeted for 80% removal by 2040. Informal networks. Beyond legal channels, informal strategies would provide speed and flexibility to the plan's implementation. Community-based networks, including independent groups or local organizations, could conduct unofficial relocations, targeting non-European residents and dissenting cultural advocates through discreet pressure or facilitated departures. These networks would operate outside formal legal frameworks, using logistical support such as transportation or documentation assistance to accelerate removals while maintaining plausible deniability. These operations would commence in 2028, focusing on post-2020 non-European arrivals and ideological dissenters, with 20% of targeted relocations completed informally by 2040 to complement legal efforts. Community-driven persuasion. Citizen-driven efforts would reinforce the plan by fostering environments that encourage targeted groups to leave voluntarily. Communities would be encouraged to limit access to services, employment opportunities, or social integration for targeted groups, creating subtle but effective pressures that incentivize departure. Public campaigns, supported by local organizations, would promote cultural unity and highlight the benefits of a cohesive society, launching in 2026 and intensifying by 2030. Compliance would be monitored through community reporting systems, aiming to achieve 30% of targeted group departures through social pressure by 2040, with significant impacts on the faith-based community and African Americans. Contingency measures. In extreme scenarios where legal and informal methods fall short, stronger measures could be considered as a last resort. Community-led campaigns might employ public demonstrations or localized pressure to encourage undocumented migrants and post-2020 arrivals to depart, starting in 2030 and affecting 10% of targeted populations by 2040. These efforts would be carefully managed to avoid escalation and maintain public support. If necessary, by 2040, controlled tensions could be initiated through orchestrated community actions to encourage departure, coordinated by local groups with secure resources and support from sympathetic local authorities to minimize resistance. Such measures would be reserved for 2040 to 2050, targeting a 20% reduction in remaining populations through displacement, while avoiding widespread conflict to preserve societal stability.